Today is May 18th, and that is the birthday of Thomas Midgley Jr. It was this date in 1889. Thomas Midgley Jr. was born. And if you've been around me for a while, you know that every year about this time, I do a talk about Thomas Midgley Jr. The talk this week is called Unintended Consequences. And I want to tell you a little bit of the stuff that I don't necessarily dwell on when I talk about Thomas Midgley Jr. And by the way, if you haven't heard of him, it's not surprising. He's one of those people that unless somebody gets his teeth into it, you're not likely to hear about. Although there is a movie in pre-production about him called Midge. So we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, he was a mechanical engineer and he got involved in chemistry a lot. In 1937, he won the Perkins Medal from the Society of Chemical Industry. In 1941, Thomas Midgley Jr. won the Priestley Medal from the American Chemical Society. That's very prestigious. From the same organization, he won the Willard Gibbs Award a year later in 1942. He was an American delegate to the International Congress for Applied Chemistry. And then in 1944, he was elected president and chairman of the American Chemical Society. So that's a big deal. He was noteworthy. Thomas Midgley Jr. was noteworthy because he was very successful in what he set out to do. And in the world of unintended consequences, the question is, what do you want? What is it that you want to create? What is it that you want to do? And the first question is, what do you want? And then a lot of us leap into, well, what am I going to do to make that happen? And then there's the observation of, well, after I did, what happened? And is what happened the same as what I wanted? And what you want can be anything. It can be a success in your work. It can be a particular job. You know, you're up for a job and you've been through 3 rounds of interviews and there's the job possibility. I really, really, really want that job or that particular boyfriend. That's the person who I want to be together with, and I'm setting my intention. That's what I want. Or this particular house. There's a possibility for me to get either the sale or my application for the rental is going to be approved and I'll get to live in that house and it's exactly what I want. And in so many cases, we think that what we want is the thing that we're looking at. And unintended consequences are what happens if what we try to do to get the thing that we want winds up being counter to our purposes. And there's the classic story of the guy who's afraid that his crush in high school is going to go to the prom with the quarterback. So that would be horrible as far as he's concerned. Oh my God, I've got to do something to keep that from happening. So he gets his best friend to ask her to go to the prom. And he does, and she says yes, and they go to the prom, and they wind up being an item, and he winds up losing the girl and his best friend. And that's the unintended consequence. And we've all had those situations come up in our lives where what we wanted and what we got did not give us the feeling that we thought we would have when we got it. So back to Thomas Midgley Jr., because I started out talking about him. He went to Cornell. He was very successful. The guy who's running the GM lab in the early 1900s, Kettering, said that he had intelligent ignorance. So he was not a chemist, but he was willing to try what experts knew wouldn't work. So Kettering put him in charge of figuring out what is going to keep internal combustion engines in automobiles, from knocking. It was a big problem that they had. The knocking is when there's not enough oomph to make the engine keep going, and it makes a horrible knocking sound, and it's very bad for the engine. So he took this guy who was very smart but didn't know anything about chemistry and put him in charge of figuring out what you could put into the fuel to make the engine stop knocking. And so over the course of 5 years, Thomas Midgley Jr. and his team tested 33,000 different combinations of additives. He carried around the periodic table of elements because he was going to use something with all of the elements to figure out what he could do to keep the engine from knocking. And they came up with a solution. The task force, his group, came up with something called TEL, or it was called ethyl. That's what they called it in the marketing language. They called it ethyl, and it was ethyl gasoline, and that was the fuel that didn't make engines knock. TEL is the full name of it. It was tetraethyl lead, and he's the guy who put lead in leaded gasoline. And on the one hand, it solved the problem because the engines didn't knock anymore. There were a couple of problems that came along from putting lead in the gasoline, which, and there's some challenges with lead that have been known about since ancient Greece. So the idea of don't use lead and don't expose people to lead was already important, but this was the way to make the engines not knock and to be successful in that area. That's what he wanted. That's what he was assigned to do. Now, it turns out there was another way to do it. They could put ethanol, distilled from grain, into the fuel, and it would also eliminate the knocking, because it turns out that the knocking was caused because the octane wasn't high enough. So it's possible to put ethanol, which is relatively clean burning, came from vegetables, and that would do the same thing. That wasn't a good solution as far as they were concerned, because of course you couldn't patent ethanol. Ethanol was something you just go out and get some corn and distill it, and there you have it. And over the course of his life, in addition to all of the awards and everything else that Thomas Midgley Jr. did, he had over 100 patents. He was very successful and very effective at his work in chemistry and chemical engineering. So he put the lead in leaded gasoline. And that's a cautionary tale, because that's one of the substances that's now been banned. And I remember when I was first starting to drive in the 1970s, we got leaded gasoline, then there was unleaded gasoline, then everybody had to use unleaded gasoline, and there was no more leaded gasoline. And the lead has slowly but surely been coming out of the air, out of our environment, making it healthier to live on planet Earth. And it's, by the way, it's not just near the refineries, it's not just where people drive a lot, because it's air. It travels around, it moves all over the place. Was that a good solution to the problem? Well, depends on what you think of as good. It turns out, in hindsight, that was very damaging to the planet, but it was successful in accomplishing what he wanted to do. And there are other stories. You've heard about somebody who wanted to get a house, and this is the house for me, and I got to get the house, and I'm up for the mortgage, and I put in my offer, and that's the house that I want to live in, and then it gets accepted, and then there's the mortgage, and then suddenly there's a loss of a job, and then suddenly the house turns into a money pit, because there are all sorts of problems that they didn't know about when they went in to buy the house, and suddenly this house that they wanted is not the house that they want. There's been all sorts of stories about people who get themselves financially upside down on their house, and then the only thing that they want to do is not have the house. Or people who become house poor. They have the wonderful house, and it's using up so much of their resources that they can't do anything other than live in their house. Can't go on a trip, can't take their kids to do X, Y, or Z, can't go out for social activities because of the house. Again, what we want to do is be careful of what it is that we are setting our intention for. There are unintended consequences. And I'll give you the hint that what you want to do is, if you have an idea of the experience that you want to be having, instead of saying, this is what I want to have happen, identify how you'll feel once having that happens. And then set the intention to have that feeling. Because if there is the guy or the girl who seems intriguing, that's the relationship that I want to have. That's what I want to be. That's what I want to build my life around. Don't focus on the person. Don't focus on that individual. Focus instead on how your life will feel, how it will change you internally. What will you be once you have that relationship? And then open to that feeling. And it is completely possible that the person who you're thinking about is going to be enamored with you as well, and it turns into a relationship, and that's happily ever after. And it's also possible there's somebody else, and as soon as you say goodbye to this person, the next one shows up. So this week I've had a few opportunities to pray for perfect fit. I was talking to somebody who's got an opportunity for a brand new relationship and is concerned this might not be the right relationship, and I don't want to be leading this person on or wasting their time, and I'm not sure what any of this means, and now I don't know what to do. And so the prayer there was not for what to do. The prayer was to know that the perfect fit was being revealed to everybody. Because and the prayer specifically in that is that everybody knows exactly if this is the right thing, if this is the perfect fit, then everybody knows. I know, he knows, all of our friends, as soon as they see us together, it's like they're perfect together. And if it's not the right fit, everybody knows that too. It's the arguments start, the squabbles, the scheduled difficulties come along. It just won't happen. And the reason that works is because there's an infinite intelligence, a limitless creative power that creates everything that's creating these experiences. And as we remind ourselves that it's not me sitting here deciding what it is that I want and then taking action steps to get to what I want, when I realize that what I'm doing is I am partnering with that infinite power and inviting that infinite power to create that next experience, that feeling that I'm looking for, something wonderful is possible. And when we try and force it, we wind up with unintended consequences. And I don't want to give unintended consequences a bad rap. But sometimes we get an unexpected consequence and it's something good. It's something desirable. It's something wonderful. The phrase for that usually is serendipity. Where you go out fishing and inadvertently hook the buried treasure or the sunken treasure. And instead of getting the fish, you wind up getting 500 pounds of gold bars. So that's an unintended consequence. That's not what you set out to go fishing for, but you wind up being pretty happy about it. I am sure, as we're talking about things that you haven't heard about, like Thomas Midgley Jr., that you're not aware of the SS Eastland. Anybody familiar with the story of the SS Eastland? Yeah. This is a story that happened in 1915. Now, this was a couple of years after that story about another ship that you might have heard about, the Titanic. That was in 1912. And you've heard what happened. There were 1,500 people who went down with the Titanic, and one of the huge problems that they had is that there were not enough lifeboats. There were not enough lifeboats on the Titanic for everybody to get into a lifeboat, and so there was this huge loss of life and this big crisis and all the rest of that. So there was a big uproar, and there was a new law. It's a new law that every ship over a certain weight had to have enough lifeboats for everybody on board. So the SS Eastland, which was apparently not a very well-designed ship anyway, was in Chicago, and they loaded it up with enough lifeboats for everybody on board, which made the ship tremendously top-heavy, and within 20 yards of its mooring place on the Chicago River, it overturned. And even though it was in 20 feet of water, there were enough people who were below decks and got tangled up and stuff that 800 people died. The SS Eastland. And the reason for it was because we thought we needed to do the opposite of what happened on the Titanic. This was the smart people thinking that they had it figured out. If instead what we want to do is be guided to make sure that everybody is going to be safe and harmonious, then somebody else would have come along and said, that's not the right rule for this particular ship. This ship is not going to do well under those circumstances, but it was a rule and we had to do it, and that's what they did. Are there unintended consequences that are showing up in your life? Are there things that have been happening, perhaps over and over and over again, and you can't figure it out, and you don't like it, and you don't know what's going on? Is it possible that you have set the intention for something that's working in a way that's not serving you? When you get to one of those situations, I'm going to change that. If you get to one of those situations, because you don't have to. If you get into one of those situations where you notice something's going on that's not the way that you had planned or intended or desired, step back. And instead of identifying what you want to have happened, how do you want to feel about whatever that is once it has happened? What's the desired experience that you'd like to have instead? Opening up to a possibility. That leaves room for the pivot. It is possible in a relationship or in a house or in a job to pray for that perfect fit. It's possible that you've gotten a job at some point that you really, really wanted that turned out to be really, really awful. And sometimes it starts out awful. Day one, it's like, why am I here? What is going on? Who are these people? And sometimes it's a slow build as the dysfunction continues to show up. But that same prayer for perfect fit, when the job opportunity comes along, to know that the perfect fit is happening. I've also had those experiences. I had my favorite job interview ever. After the interview, and I was done with the entire company. I think there were a dozen people in the interview. They were all talking to me to come on and be a consultant working with them. They were a consulting company. I was going to be the guy who they're selling services of. And after the meeting, the people who already worked there said, "Wow, it seems like he's worked here forever." And it was a dream job. It was wonderful. It was great. And it was one of those situations where everything was fitting together in perfection. That's possible. That's possible for each of us in whatever we're getting involved in. And we need to let go of our attachment to having it be the way that we say that we want it to be, and let it be the way that it's going to be. Back to Thomas Midgley. Through all this stuff with tetraethyl lead, as he was trying to prove that it was safe, and it was not, he wound up giving himself lead poisoning a couple of times. And the last time that he got lead poisoning, he had to spend a couple of years in Switzerland recovering from the lead poisoning. They had shut down the plant where that was under question anyway, because it turns out there were way too many people losing their mind because of the lead that was in the air. So he came back, got assigned to another project. Refrigeration was the thing that was coming along at that point. There was lots of ammonia and other really harsh chemicals being used in refrigeration. So he got put in charge of the team to come up with a refrigerant that could be used. And he invented Freon. He's the guy who came up with chlorofluorocarbons, which were non-toxic and odorless and tasteless and wonderful. Except it turns out that they destroyed the ozone layer, and if they were left in use, then they would have ruined the planet. And Freon, refrigerant R12, was also banned. So he was 2 for 2. These stories happen all the time. And sometimes when we think we know more than we know, we can outsmart ourselves. So what we want to do is make sure that we are in that place of balance and harmony and fit. There's another story about the law of gravitation. This is the last scientific bit that I'm going to do for you today. So this guy, Isaac Newton, formulated the theory of gravitation, and he did that in 1687. And it turns out that it applied to everything, and the people who were doing astronomical observations would measure where planets were. And then the people with the calculations would say, well, this is, what it means, and predict either that all of the pieces are exactly where they're supposed to be, or realize that there are other things that are affecting it, and all the math worked out. Well, then in the mid-1800s, they had been observing the planet Uranus, which takes like 85 years to make an orbit of the sun. So they'd been observing it and getting accurate measurements of where it was long enough that they could tell, based on Newton's laws of gravitation, where it should be. Only it was in the wrong place. It was off, not exactly where it belonged. And so in 1845, a couple of mathematicians working independently started figuring out, well, something's got to be affecting the position of Uranus, and what is it? So Leverrier was working in Paris, and Adams was working at Cambridge, and they both did the calculations to figure out what might be causing this planet to be in its weird location, and they both came up with the same idea. There must be another planet, and it should be here. And they contacted their observatories. And the Royal British Observatory said, well, who is this guy sitting in a closed room with a pencil and a piece of paper doing calculations to tell me where to look in the sky? We're not doing that. Harumph, harumph, harumph. And the guy in Berlin who was paying attention to the French scientist found Neptune. Exactly where he said it was going to be. And it turns out that the guy at Cambridge was right as well. Guess who won the Copley Medal? The ones who followed their guidance and didn't think they knew the answers ahead of time. by surrendering, by letting go of thinking that we know what's going on, by allowing and inviting the unintended consequences to simply be things that are going to be loving and uplifting rather than having the circumstances go the way that we say it ought to go, all sorts of possibilities come about. Good and more good is available for all of us. And we can bring success and joy and harmony and love into our lives. And on this Thomas Midgley Jr.'s birthday, we can celebrate our awareness of unexpected consequences and understand that CNN has called Midgley, quote, the man who almost destroyed the planet twice. A cautionary tale about unintended consequences. Possibilities are open to you. What are you creating this week? Set an intention for something spectacular, because we all deserve it. So it is.